Here's what I know about the great man Doris William Adams, my grandpa Adams, Bill Adams. He was born in 1906, and this is just what I hear that was passed down to me. My Aunt Jackie Sue has more family history than I do, and some of this might not be true, but I think it is. That was what was told to me. This is the way I remember it. But he was orphaned when he was 6 years old, and he was born in 1906, and orphaned at 6, and he went to work to live with his uncle Count. Uh, and there again, Jackie Sue knows more about this kind of thing than I do, and could fill in the blanks if you're so interested. But he started. He was on his own at 12. From 12 years old on, he was on his own, and he he hung around a golf course somewhere in Arkansas. He was born in Arkansas. He's an Arkansas boy. And he told me that we have a family graveyard somewhere in Arkansas, but I forget where that is. Uh, but he started hanging around the golf courses, and he caddied for a living and supported himself as a caddy. Uh, and who knows what else. Uh, I know that he was uh, somewhat irresponsible in his earlier adult years. Um, he was a professional golfer in the 30s, and there was no money in it. Yeah, there was Sam Snead, and I think Ben Hogan and those guys, Walter Hagen. I don't know. He just maybe wasn't as good as them or what, but he was played against them and knew him. He knew him personally, and our family's always been proud of that. And our golf has been a huge part of our family ever since. Except for me, I don't play, but he uh, he figured out a way to blend his golf and his game and how to make a living. But it was the 30s, and it wasn't that easy to make money. And he started working for the WPA, and they built projects around Arkansas just to try and make a living. There was no money in golf. There was no money in anything really. Even the pros weren't making any money, not enough to support a family. And so he went to work for the WPA. And one of the stories that he told me, and it's been in our family ever since, is they were working in the Arkansas State. They called it the insane asylum in those days. They don't call it that anymore. But he was working with the crew at the Arkansas Insane Asylum, and one of the inmates or patients walked by and said, "Eight peaches, seed and all. Eight peaches, seed and all." Well, yeah, after a little bit, the ambulance showed up and hauled him away, and he died. And Grandpa thought that was funny. I mean, not that he died, but every so often he'd say, eight peaches, seed and all. And the family knew what that meant, and I knew the story. Um, but somehow or another, he moved to Kansas from Arkansas in his adult years. And I don't know exactly the circumstances that he moved to Kansas, but I do know that he ended up being the green superintendent at Rolling Hills Country Club in Wichita. And he was a good golfer. He could drive par fives because in those days they didn't have irrigation, and the and the fairways would get hard in the summertime without much water, and and he could drive. His drives would they would just bounce and roll to the. He could drive the five pars, and that, all right, he had several hole in ones. I know some of the family have these little golf balls that he was presented by Dunlop, and he played the Max Flies, and he had hole-in-ones and won golf tournaments. And Uncle Jerry won. My Uncle Jerry won a lot of golf tournaments when he was growing up with Grandpa. Here's a kind of a funny story. Maybe a couple of funny stories about their time, my time with Grandma and Grandpa, and in Wichita. They lived like on the other side of the creek from Rolling Hills, and to get there, you had to kind of drive around. And the way I remember it, I wasn't very old when they lived at Rolling Hills, but here's two stories that I do remember. Maybe three stories. For one, Grandpa and Grandma they just lived in an old farmhouse pretty close to the creek, and it was just a wonderful place. We visited them numerous times. But they had a dog. His name was Buster, and he was a mean bastard. He'll bite you. And Grandpa Adams and my dad, they both they just said, "Don't ever go near Buster. He'll bite you. He'll kill you." So I never did. I knew Buster was a mean dog. All right, I had these cowboy boots. I was about 4 years old or so, but I had these cowboy boots, and I wore them just every day with short pants, with pajamas. I remember loving those boots. And we were at Grandpa and Grandma's, and they had a wood stove to heat. Maybe it was coal. Maybe they burned coal. I don't know. But anyway, it was wintertime, and they burned the old potbelly stove, and the kitchen there was just going full bore, keeping the house warm. And my dad says, "It's time. You've worn out those cowboy boots. I got you a new pair of shoes, and take off those cowboy boots and give them to me." And I go, "What are you going to do with Anyway, the next thing I remember, I don't remember anything between there and the next thing I know, my dad lifted the lid off of the top of the wood stove, and he dropped my boots into the fire. I've been traumatized ever since. I just couldn't believe my eyes. To me, they weren't wore out. I still liked them. Maybe they were too small for me. I know I wore them for a long time. But maybe that's why I have a cowboy boot collection now, in my adulthood. I got cowboy boots, and nobody can burn them. I got them. All right, here's another story. My Grandma Adams, she didn't drive all her life, and Grandpa or somebody had to give her a ride to the grocery store and all that, and she was, but my dad and her just argued. They bickered, and I think I got some of that bickering from hearing Dad and Grandma. Excuse me. But anyway, Grandpa and my dad and Grandma would bicker, and me and Grandma would. It turns out, and later on, that me and Grandma bickered too, and I couldn't stay with them in the summer anymore and work for Grandpa, because me and Grandma were just like oil and water, just we loved each other and we got along, but we irritated each other, and I just couldn't turn it around, and I've always felt bad about that, because my brothers couldn't go and work for Grandpa either, because everybody thought, well, Randy was an asshole. All the brothers are probably assholes too, so I don't think that. I'm just joking about being an asshole, but we couldn't get along. We did, but not very good. Almost always we did, but okay. But anyway, they moved to Topeka. Harold, the story about Grandma Adams. All right, so Grandma, somehow the story, the subject came up that Grandma didn't drive, and Grandma says, "Well, I can drive, no problem." And my dad says, "You can't drive." Everybody said, "You can't drive. You never have driven before." And she goes, "I know how to drive." And she goes, "Watch me." And she gets in her car, and I don't remember what kind of car it was, but there was like this empty field next to the farmhouse of Grandma and Grandpa Adams's, and Grandma got in the car and started it up, and of course it was a stick shift, and she killed it a couple of times, and everybody laughed. And he goes, "She can't drive, boy." She got that thing going, and it was dry, and she just floored it. And she didn't go on the road. She went around this field, kind of a pasture thing, and she floored it. And I mean, the dust was just, she was kicking up a huge rooster tail of dust, and everybody was going, "Oh my God, what have we done?" And she spun around that thing. It was probably a quarter-mile track around that pasture, and she came to a sliding stop, and she gets out and I told you I could drive. And I remember everybody was so relieved when she got back. Everybody breathed a sigh of relief. All right, but then they moved to. That's all I remember of Rolling Hills in Wichita, the golf course there. And he went to got my grandpa got a job at Topeka Country Club as a green superintendent, and yeah, it was a great job. It suited him. He worked there until he retired when he was 72. Uh, the I don't know if I have that many more stories to tell about Grandpa. He found a way to balance his. He started going to church when he was in the early 50s, maybe a little earlier than the early 50s, but he started going to church, and that was an important part of his life for the rest of his time. And I know before that he had trouble really keeping things going, he liked to play dominoes, and I know that he was real good at dominoes, and dominoes is kind of like poker. You bet on it, and several times he lost his paycheck playing dominoes and at the bar. And after he started going to church, he turned into a real responsible father and grandfather and husband. And I just remember one time I went to church with him, and there's several good stories about going to church with him. Me and my brothers going to church with him, with Grandma and Grandpa, but I won't tell them. But one of the things that impressed me is Grandpa was like he was an elder or a deacon or something in the church there, and he counted the money. they counted the money that came in the collection plate, and he was in charge of it, putting it in the bank or whatever he did with it. But I remember he'd go into this little room off the church, in the church there, in this little office thing, and he'd count the money and put it and fill out the ledger, and then we'd go eat at the Senate Cafe at the Senate cafeteria. It was a buffet, and a lot of the church people ate there, and it was just really good. I loved eating there, and so did everybody else on Sunday dinner. But that's kind of what I know about Grandpa Adams. There's of course, there's a lot more stories, but maybe those are the ones that at this time that come to my mind, somewhat in chronological order. Um, and I do want to say that I named my son Bill.